Welcome back, people. It's Chris Angell and Aaron Hendon coming at you with another episode of the Mindful CEO.
Coming at you.
Coming at you.
Coming at you.
That was I did that as in college when we had voicemail on college phones. That was my it's Chris Angell coming at you, and it just stuck with me. I don't know. It's funny. I just liked it. So
that was your outgoing message.
That was when somebody called in and was going to leave a message. Hey, it's Chris Angell coming at you. Leave me a message. Anyway, I don't know. It just stuck with me.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, good. Coming at you.
Coming at you.
I feel weird that we're not starting having told some big joke before we started recording.
We're in it's at the time of this recording, it's the end of November, and we're coming up on December, January, big goal setting months, yes. Big visioning months. And
that sort of that time suck of unproductivity that the time between Thanksgiving and New Year's is just the massive amount of energy it takes to be productive during this time, because the black hole of overeating, over drinking, over socializing, time off, everything is organized around I'll do it next year. Certainly in my business in real estate, everyone's like, we're waiting till next year, we're holding off. I mean, it's the most common objection we get at this time. It is like that. So so that's that. And then we were really talking about what it takes to keep a future alive. First of all, I think the thing that got us into the conversation was the power of having an inspiring future to shape the context of now, right? Like standing in mindfulness is being here in the present moment, right? And the present moment is contextless, right? The present moment is just what it is. It's the moment. It doesn't have a context. It's right, empty, meaningless, as they say. And then what gives context is the future that one is living into, either created or default. What we say the future is what gives context to the moment. That's what we were starting. And I was starting with that the future I'm living into is that I'm full of shit. I can't make a difference. Nothing's moving. I don't have anything real to contribute. Other people do it better than me. I'll be found out as a fraud. All those kinds of futures. Anyone know any of those kinds of futures? That's mostly what I was. Which is just makes now so inspiring.
Right. Yeah. I don't think you're alone in that, for sure. I think that's especially this time of year. I think you start looking at what you accomplished this year, and you start looking at all the ground you have to make up next year for the ground you didn't take this year. And you start to see like, God, like I've been at this for a while. I've been at this for, you've been in real estate for 10 years. I've been in business for 20 some years, some of that in real estate. Add on top of that, you and I I'm pretty sure we're neurally divergent. I'm pretty sure we're all over the place in terms of, multiple projects in motion.
Yeah. We talk about I don't know enough about it to have anything real useful to say about it, but my suspicion is that there is anything but neurodivergence. I think everyone's unique. I think everyone, I don't know, but maybe not. Maybe that's just my bias that everyone's like me.
I will side note that and just say, like, if you haven't read The Gifted Adult, I highly recommend you read The Gifted Adult. I listened to it because I can't read, and I still didn't finish it. But as they were describing people who are neurodivergent that way, and all the complaints the people who are connected or married to neurodivergent people, things I'm like, to use your phrase, I felt recreated. Like people saying, why can't you just stick with one thing? Why do you have so many plates in the air? Why are you doing all these things? And I'm like, it's just, and I made myself wrong for that for a lot of years. And it contributed to my imposter syndrome, because I thought I shouldn't be this way. I should be able just to focus on one thing and do it. And it's not how I'm wired. And there was a lot of grace once I just could be like, maybe this is how I'm wired. There was a lot of grace for and getting present to, surrendering to, this is me.
Mm.
And a lot of that imposter stuff fell off. And I'm like, okay, well, if this is me, then how do I ride this thing? How do I be with all of this? So
That's
I'll just
interesting.
add that sidebar.
That's great. I mean, I hadn't thought about it in terms of giving me space for, but before the show, I wrote down all the different projects I have going, and I have 7 different things,
Yeah.
7 different plates in the air, and they all, need to produce today, son of God damn it. Why are they
Yes.
not?
Right.
Why are they not working yet? And so there's,
right.
and that they're not working yet is evidence for I'm full of shit.
Right.
That they all don't work
Yeah.
immediately is evidence for I'm a fake. If I weren't a fake, everything would work or something would work, right? And then so we're going to follow that thread, right? The insanity of that thread, the assertion there is nothing's working. It's easy to step into, well, fuck, nothing's working. I got all these things, and clearly there's something wrong with me.
Right.
The ease with which, and I don't know people for whom that's not the first place or the automatic place to go. Is there something wrong with them? That's that I am pretty clear after, training tens of thousands of people that there's something wrong, and there's something wrong with me is sort of a base level.
Yeah.
When there's something wrong, it's where we look as ourselves. That I had a thought about that, and I've lost it now because obviously I'm full of shit and I can't keep a whole thought in my head. Just to follow. Oh, I cannot remember where I was going to go with that thought. Oh my God. There's something wrong. There's something wrong with me. What were we talking? How did I get into that?
Well, I don't know. I was
What was
holding
the way
space
into
for
that
you to
room?
find it, and now
gotta
I
go
don't
back
know.
out of the room and come in again.
I
Why am
have
in the
something
kitchen?
to,
What
let
am
me
I
see if,
doing in the kitchen?
I think, yeah, I think that's super common for humans to go, there's something wrong, there's something wrong with me. It's interesting to me, the context shift, that if you saw yourself like I see you, Aaron, right, as someone who I think has created an incredible life and has incredible skills, who has the courage to take on 7 projects in this moment, that there's some time, some gestation for all those things, and that you would demand an immediate result is not characteristic of the alchemist that you are. Like, if you really stepped into the alchemist you are, you just would know there's time it takes to pull all of this wonder together, to transmute the intentions you have into fruit. Just takes time, and you would know that if you would step into the alchemist you are, rather than play the whatever imposter thing you think you are. You know what I mean? Like, that's just the I think we all do that. We're like, if we could just step back and honor all the things that want to come through us without a time attached to it, we could be appropriate with the transmuting there is to do with it.
Or
But
even
then,
the time attached to it as a something that I've attached to it versus it's real and it should be and it's supposed to be. And if it were true, it would be this way, which are really different than, okay, I'm going to have X done by the end of the week, or I'm going to have this promise accomplished today, or if I'm at the source of it, then it's empowering because I'm the one who said it. And even if I don't hit it, I'm the one who said, and I'm responsible for having said, I can look to see what was missing that would, if I put it in, would have the next time go different, which is really different than if any of these 7 fucking things were true, or any of these 7 projects were really useful, or people really wanted them, they'd be successful by now, which is a description of something and not a creation of something. It's not a sourceful relationship to those 7 things.
Yeah, that's good.
You know, and you said, you just said it again, and it's why we started recording, because you were talking about gestation,
Yeah.
right? And the amount of time it takes something to grow,
Yeah.
to be birthed. And, you know, the story, and this actually happened to me. It's a pretty typical metaphor, but I remember the day it actually happened was that, you know, we're planting strawberries, and my son was probably 4,
Yeah.
something like that. And, you know, planting with kale and, you know, in the garden and doing all the work. And, you know, the 4-year-old dude is like hungry, goes up for lunch, comes up, has his lunch, maybe he goes down for a nap, and then wakes up and he's like, oh, and goes downstairs and digs up the plants to see if they started to grow yet. And, you know, nothing grows like that. That's obviously, you know, not the way you get something to grow. You can't just dig it up, right? And and you got to let it gestate. You got to let it start. And it's so funny too, because we were just talking about this the other day. I went showing houses to my friend Glenn and his girlfriend, and he's got bamboo in his front yard, and in the back now he's got these, you know, bamboo poles that he cut out, uses for various, you know, fencing and stuff. And it's like, yeah, those grew, and they grew, you know, it was like one day, you know, he had planted it, or it had been there for years and years and years. And then one day, big, huge sprouts came up and grew like a foot a day, which is the story about how bamboo grows, right? I mean, you know, if you're into business metaphors and business books, they talk about bamboo takes 5 years before you see anything, but when you see it, it grows like a foot a day. And he's like, yeah, that's actually what happened in my front yard. And, you know, because it spends its first 5 years building its support structure, its root structure, its ability to do that. And then the thing just skyrockets. And, you know, we're planting seeds. So we're talking about, you know, that space of cultivating or nurturing something along. And if you're going to use that metaphor of planting, right, which I think you did, right, planting seeds, right, the communities you're building are all planting seeds. And I thought it was really useful for you to use that metaphor of, look, I don't know how many apples I get off this particular tree. Right. I don't know what that tree is going to produce in terms of fruit, but I do know that trees produce fruit when they're nurtured. And, you know, I can always plant more. And the name of the game is to plant enough so that I get an abundance of fruit, because they will eventually fruit if I tend to it. And the part of tending to it that I've been doing a shit job about, that I came to the call all messed up about, is the weeding. You know, and I think those disempowering conversations about my being full of shit and this isn't working, and if it was useful, it would be done, and I don't have anything to contribute, and look at this guy over here, he's really got something to contribute and I don't, and they do it better than me, and look at that website, that's way more slick than mine, and I'm not going to get that, and I don't have anything, you know, blah 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 blah, all that. Those weeds, nothing more than weeds, and weeds don't take anything to grow. They don't take anything. You don't need to nurture weeds. You don't need to, you know, be careful and germinate them, and no, weeds just float in.
That's good.
And they take root by themselves. And we don't look at them and go, oh, my garden has weeds, there's something wrong with my garden.
Right. Yeah. Good point.
You just weed the garden.
Yeah, it's good.
Right. You don't be like, oh, I didn't set the garden up right because it has weeds.
Right.
You know, you expect weeds.
Yeah.
You deal with weeds before, you know, we when we do our garden, we do those nylon sheets so that weeds don't grow around the plants. Right.
Yeah.
And I don't think I have that context, or I hadn't created that context for myself around the things my 7 projects that I planted, and then noticing the disempowering thoughts as, oh, look, there's a weed, right? Rather than that weed is a problem. No, that's just the weed. It's literally just the weed.
I like that. Yeah, that's really good. That's a really good metaphor.
Yeah, we're gonna rock with that. We're gonna
I
rock with that metaphor. Weeding
it
the garden.
it occurs
That's
to
a
me that
chapter. That's going to be actually a chat. This is good. I've started a list over Thanksgiving. I'm going to add it now. This is good. I started a list of chapters. Hang on, I'm getting it up on my phone. Of things are never so bad they can't get worse. Um, that's the book. And
nice.
weeding the garden. That's a chapter. I have. We should talk about the other chapters too, because there was actually one that before I went down the tunnel of I'm full of shit and I have nothing to contribute, fully got myself in that world when I was still doing this. I did have a theme for the show that I forgot about, but I got myself so in the weeds.
Uh-huh.
Right. That's a great saying too, in the weeds.
So,
You know, when you're in the weeds, that's what that is. You're in the weeds, you're stuck and you don't, you know, too
yeah.
much in the weeds. Um, yes, I've been writing down chapter headings for my book. Things are never so bad they can't get worse.
Uh-huh. Are you going to share them now, or you want to
Oh,
share?
well, I could. Yeah. So, I mean, the idea of the book really is, I did notice that up until, yesterday and prepping for this call and realizing that I am, just completely and totally resigned about my life and I can't make a difference and it's all fucked.
Yeah.
Which is historically, I'm 60 now, so 55 years, whatever. Certainly a good portion of my life has been spent in that sort of doom,
Mm.
imminent doom.
Yeah.
Things are never so bad they can't get worse is my family crest
Mm.
is, how I've spent the majority of my life. And then recently, and I would think over the last, I got it. I don't have it pinpointed, but it's the last 2 or 3 years. I stopped worrying. I just stopped worrying. I just stopped. I don't know. Up until yesterday, like, I was like, oh, good. Yay. Look at that. It's not like it doesn't come up from time to time, but it's no longer the fundamental context of my life. And it hasn't been for a few years now. And so I thought that would be a useful book to write is, and all the different pieces of where I got, the spaciousness to be able to do that. Things are never so bad they can't get worse, or how I stopped worrying and learned to love my life is the working title of the book. And it's funny because what's right there is all the justifications for, oh, well, I was a realtor during the pandemic and it was really easy to make money during the pandemic. And now as soon as I made some money, I don't have to worry anymore. And now all of a sudden business got tough. So now, of course, I'm worrying. So this is all bullshit. And it's just the justification and the reasons. And that is such a greased slide. It's so easy to go down the road of things don't work and why they don't work and to explain it away versus really deal with having the I don't think it's mental toughness, but the space or the permission to look and create something. So I mean, I have gratitude, and I don't even have them all worked out, like why they're titles of chapters. They're just thoughts that I wanted to explore in it. For sure, diving into gratitude has made an enormous difference for me. This thing about weeding the garden is good. One of my favorite Grateful Dead lyrics seems to make sense here. You ain't going to learn what you don't want to know. I don't know what that chapter's about, but I love that lyric. I think it's a great sentiment. You ain't going to learn what you don't want to know. There's the big self, the big S self, right? Versus the small S self.
Yeah.
Being good to yourself, everything in moderation, including moderation. And then the thing that I liked was distinguishing the thing I was planning on talking about on the show was distinguishing distinctions. Like, what is it to run your life from principles, and to distinguish something for yourself
Yeah.
versus understand it.
Yep.
The difference between understanding something and distinguishing something.
Yeah.
Like you don't understand,
Yep.
which is why the forum is so unbelievable for people, because they don't understand it,
Right.
but they've distinguished it.
Yeah.
That methodology is just so well done for that,
Yeah.
because you don't understand balance. No one needs to understand balance to ride a bike. You don't need to know velocity and mass and direction and effort. None of that makes any understanding. It makes no difference. You just balance. You've learned to balance, and you learn to balance. The thing about distinguishing something is you learned how to do it. You discovered how to do it by doing it wrong enough times that you actually discovered the opposite. You discovered what there was to do. You discovered balance by falling.
Yeah.
You distinguished balance by falling until you got not falling, and you call not falling balance. And then once you got balance, like as a toddler, literally a toddler, we call them toddlers because they toddle, right? Until they stop toddling, and now they're just kids, but they fall. Then distinguish not fall. Then you learn balance on a bike, and then you learn balance on a scooter or scooter for whatever, and then balance in skiing. But even when you go from walking to skiing, you're now going from not falling to falling again. You're just going to falling again. You now found a new way to fall. You don't fall when you walk. Right? You're not falling when you walk anymore.
Yeah.
But you want to expand that capacity, so you put yourself in a situation where you do fall until you distinguish not falling on skis on a hill, and then you do that. Or you could distinguish not falling on a surfboard. You could distinguish not falling on ice skates, or to not, it's not really, you could, but anything you distinguish it by doing it wrong until you stop doing it wrong, until you get the result. But there's that enormous gap that must be gone through of all the ways not to produce the result.
Yeah. And can I add something in here?
Yeah.
I feel like one of the part of I had this thought earlier, but I'll frame it inside of how you're sharing now, like that there is until you can distinguish what kind of garden you want to create, until you can distinguish the game you want to play, you will continue falling in everyone else's game that you compare yourself to. Like, I'm going to do it like Gary Vee does it, or I'm going to do it like Gary Keller does it, or I'm going to do. And so you fall and you fall and you fall, and you just keep thinking, I'm an imposter. I don't know what the hell I'm doing, because you haven't yet distinguished the kind of garden you want to create.
Yeah, it's good. And I think the key word there is distinguish. You may have it in your mind as an idea, but it hasn't become for you, it's not distinguished. And that's really good, Chris, because I wouldn't ever have connected that way. But it's really important that it's, it's not distinct, it's still, I mean, I think you can use that in anything that you're failing at, right? It's not become for you who you are.
Yeah.
Right. You are a walker. You are a skier.
Yeah.
You are a bike rider, and or you're not, people that don't know how to swim.
Yeah. It's why you couldn't, if you were like, I want to garden, you had distinguished it enough to say, I want to garden. I'm trying to unpack this metaphor here. Yeah. You're like, I want to be in business because I want to make money. Convert that to the metaphor. I want to garden because I want to have food to eat. but
Mm.
that's not specific. That's just so you buy this kind of seed and that kind of seed in different soils, and you are kind of trying to throw them all together, but you haven't distinguished what you actually want. Do you want strawberries? Do you want apples? You haven't actually said, this is what I
Mm.
want. You just kind of broad
Right.
stroked it like, I want money, but you didn't really get specific about what kind of money, what kind of garden. And as you start to distinguish what you want, you can set up the raised beds and the position and the rows, and you can calculate what kind of yield you might want to have by how many seeds you plant. All of that comes from you deciding what kind of garden you'd actually want to create.
Right. And different plants have different requirements of sun and
Yeah.
nutrients
Yeah.
and tending to, and,
Yep.
some, like garlic,
Right.
when you grow garlic, it's a whole thing. It's a very
Yeah.
narrow stalk, and you got to weed even more, and it's a
Yeah.
much more difficult process. Rice is a whole separate
Separate.
thing, right? Different,
So
whole
if
different environment.
of course you feel like an imposter. I say this to you, but I mean this to
Yeah.
everyone who's ever felt like an imposter. Of course we feel like imposters when we're throwing different soil and seeds in places that don't have light or the wrong kind of conditions, and we look at it and we go, this hasn't produced anything yet, and I'm a fraud. And we go, it's just not the whole picture. Like, you're a toddler toddling, and you just haven't distinguished yet what you want to create. And I think for me, this is only, like I said, in the last couple of years, I've found a lot of comfort in and confidence in starting just to distinguish what kind of garden I want to build. And as I've done that, it has, like you said, I don't know how many dollars an apple tree I don't know how many apples an apple tree is going to bear. I don't know how many dollars specifically this business plan is going to yield, but I know it will yield dollars. And I can just now focus my attention on weeding, watering, cultivate whatever I need to do to nurture the crop. But I'm pretty clear about what crop I want to grow.
Yeah, it's good. I think just to keep the metaphor going, because I really do. I love metaphors, and a solid metaphor really works. And this thing
Yeah.
about gardening is good here. So the 7 projects that I got going here,
Mhm.
right?
Hmm.
I mean, on one hand, it's not like okay, so it's not like I'm just throwing seeds around, like trying now.
Yeah.
My son is about to go visit colleges, right? And we may be out by you. We're going to go to. He's going to go check out Wazoo and Whitman.
Nice.
And he's throwing seeds around,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that's appropriate at 17, 18, 19, 20, and really at any age. Forget about
Yeah.
it. If you have no idea what you want to plant, then by all means,
Yeah. Right.
grow seeds around until you see what starts to grow around you that you
Yep.
want to nurture and tend to and care for. And,
Yep.
that speaks to you. Like, what kind of fruit do you like?
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I could definitely see that all of these are, this of a particular fruit, right? They're the
Yeah.
particular
Yep.
variety, right?
Mhm.
All
Yeah.
these
Good.
things are inside of
Mhm.
empowering people's agency, and they
Yeah.
are already, I
Good.
can see I already have,
Mm.
some land bought that has the right amount of sun, and I've already got stuff staked out
Mm-hmm.
that can speak to that. I've got a skill set that
Mhm.
I already know how to garden in a particular way. I know how to
Yeah.
nurture those trees. So all
Yeah.
of that's good. And,
Uh-huh.
I think the thing that gets me,
Mm.
I don't want to say it that way. Really, how I came to the call, Chris, and how I have been operating like this is really sort of embarrassed that I stopped weeding.
Mm.
Right. Because I know better than to allow weeds to
Mm.
take seed and to take root in the
Yep.
garden.
Yeah.
And overly, and there's things about these that I don't know, like how long do they take to fruit?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how long any of these take to fruit. I know that businesses work. I know that you can start a business and have it work, and They do. And everything's
Yeah.
in a season, but you've got to weed it and you got to water it and you got to take care of it all the way up. But it's definitely fruit that I am interested in tending to. So
Mm, mm,
it's good. But I think
yeah.
there's that embarrassment of the lack of weeding and then pretending it doesn't work
Yeah.
when really you just stop weeding it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
you stop tending to it and then you pretended it didn't work.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting. I don't think we talked about him on the show, but I think we have in the past. But Alex Hermosi, um, if you don't know, just Google Alex Hermosi. He's sort of a business guru these days. And saw one of his little Instagram posts about, the way businesses, the only two possible outcomes of a business is that you begin it and you tend to it and you keep tracking it and you keep fixing what's not working and you keep adjusting it and you keep making go until the thing works, or you quit.
Mm, mm,
And those are the only two possible outcomes.
mm, mm-hmm.
Those are the only two things. Now there's a little, in the background, there may be, for certainly contextually for most of us, there's a thing about, winners never quit and quitting is a problem. And you should never quit and all that bullshit that comes with quitting, that you and I are definitely in the camp with Seth Godin about. No, quitting, that's a ridiculous statement. Quitting is, if you didn't quit winning your bed, you would never stop winning your bed. You got to quit certain things. Um, and actually, if we want to keep, this is good. We're down several tunnels I didn't think we'd go down, which is really the point of the show, right?
Yeah.
When I think about The Dip, which is the Seth Godin book that talks about quitting and how quitting is your only access to success, right? Is that you could only be successful when you quit all the things that aren't successful. His assertion is you've got to find a niche.
Yeah, I like both.
Niche. You got to find a niche that you can be number one in, because there's no point in going for it if you're not going to be number one in it, which I think sort of messed me up about this. That's where I started looking at other people in the space and I'm like, well, they do it better than me. I'm never going to be able to compete with them. Like if you're going to be a coffee shop, you are going to come. You got to find a way to compete with Starbucks, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but if you live where I live on an island, that's not a problem because there is no Starbucks on the island. So you could be the number one on the island to get that to work. You've got to keep carving out the space. And what you consider number one to be, until you can get yourself as the number one thing in that space. And I noticed how that started to mess with me. Like, oh God, I can't be number one in empowering real estate agents because there's already too many major players in that space that do a job that's better than I. And then there's the downward spiral of weeds.
I just for those listening, I feel like, this is where when you add, if we're going to talk about mindful CEOs, I'm going to suggest that each of us has a premise to our work, right? When blank happens, the world will change. For me, when leaders lead, the world will change. You have this premise around agency. When people experience agency, their own agency, the world will change. Like when you add that to the broad stroke of being number one, which is such a daunting piece of advice, you could say, like, I could be number one in helping mindful CEOs, operate from a place of agency. Like, that is you distinguishing the garden you want to build. And it's not like you have to compete with Starbucks garden. You just go, this is what my heart and soul wants to do. And I think this is important because I think a lot of times people will feel like an imposter because, again, they didn't distinguish what their soul wants to do. They looked out into a marketplace of broad strokes, a marketplace full of gardens, and they said they tried to copy and emulate and funnel hack someone else's garden. Well, I'm going to go do Starbucks, or I'm going to do that. And we're all trying to build competitive gardens, and none of it is what our soul wants to do. So if you could tune into, this is why I love the mindful conversation, because I feel like mindful CEOs actually spend time thinking about this. What does your soul want? And then you could go be number one at that, because nobody else is going to have that particular garden. Anyway.
That's great. I mean, I can hear that, Chris, for you, right? Inside what you're building with communities.
Yeah.
And how that is an expression of something, and, having empowering people's communities is your expression. It's your fruit tree. It's what you want. And, you could be the number one in that space. Right. And I think, just a thought, haven't worked any of this out yet.
Yeah.
Part of the throwing of the seeds around is to discover what grows that I could be number one at.
Yeah.
Good. Right. Like that, to actually say that, like, oh, that is, that's the thing right there that I could actually stand for. That's the thing I'm going to, that's the tree. That's the garden I want to build right there. Right. And until then, you're just throwing, not just take the just out. Sure. Until then, you're experimenting with various plants and various things to see what resonates with you and what speaks to you inside, that, the Dharma wheel, the ikigai, the, your purpose in life. Right.
I was just thinking ikigai. I was just, before you said that, thinking there's, when you've had the privilege of throwing seeds for a while. Mm-hmm. I used to call this I used to call this being a perpetual seeker. If we talked about this, where you're always almost there, like you're almost there, but you're always almost, you never get there. And for a while I wore seeker as a badge of honor. Like, I think that's cool. I think it's cool to seek wisdom and truth. But the problem was it was a moving target. I just never, ever got there, wherever there was. And so if you're in the habit or the neural pattern of throwing seeds, and your identity is wrapped up in seeker, meaning you're forever going to be seeking because you're proud of being a seeker, you'll never actually distinguish what kind of garden you want to plant. And I think for some of us who've been throwing seeds for a while, we have enough repetition to find that ikigai, to find, to tune in and listen to your soul, what your soul actually wants to do. Because it's probably already there. I don't think for most of us who've been on this planet a while that you don't know what it is. Mine showed up in my 20s. It shows up when you're young, and then you sort of forget about it as you go acquire skills. But there's a thing your soul wants to do. If you're old enough, you have enough skill to sort of determine what you're good at. There's some genetic encoding. We've talked about that. There's some thing that nobody taught you how to do that you're good at. And so my point is, you can start, this is distinguishing. You're distinguishing, I have this skill set, I have this soul and heart to do something. And if you could just start to distinguish how they play together, you could build a garden that would produce fruit. But if you don't distinguish it, then what you do is you continue throwing seeds, and you compare your harvest of random seed throwing to Alex Hormozy, who's making a ton of money doing something that he's distinguished very clearly for himself.
Yeah, that speaks to him, and like that's good. I mean, I do think there's that level of that last thing you said about, I'm going to compare my seed tossing to someone who's been cultivating a specific garden. Gary Vee has been cultivating a specific garden for a long time. Yeah. I don't get to look at my garden of random plants selection and compare it to his with any integrity. I also don't get to compare the seedling that I just planted around mindful CEOs
Yep.
that I really am committed to grow, that I could nurture into something to his
Right.
garden either, because his garden's been there forever and it's a whole different,
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
you just can't compare the two, right? It doesn't make any sense to compare, don't
Yeah.
compare your day one to their year 30, like
Right.
doesn't make any sense there. But when you focus on yours, can you weed that garden? Can you find what it takes to nurture that plant? Can you develop the kind of conversations? And find it, meaning distinguish it, meaning do it wrong. You kill enough of those plants, right?
Yep.
That you finally get the formula, you personally, and all your alchemy and your personal karma and your dharma and your whole trip finally produces that, and you're going to continue in that. And you are perpetually seeking that until it shows up, and you have to be willing to have it show up.
Yeah.
And I think I have avoided the pain of distinguishing as an activity, right? Because it entails falling on my ass until I distinguish not, and I feel like that's the new endeavor. That's the space of this new endeavor. And when I go back to looking at, the things are never so bad they can't get worse, and where that showed up in my business, was, I did that in real estate. I failed. Oh, look, this works. Right. And, in my, in the bakery, there was that in the recipe testing, fail. Oh, this is it. There's the recipe.
Yeah.
That's the recipe. Right. But we never got there as a, we got there to whatever extent we got there as a business before I sold it. But there were all other things to distinguish there that could have been distinguished there that weren't about that. I don't know.
I want to add one thing to that, which is, since we're name dropping, Tim Ferriss years ago wrote the 4-Hour Chef, and it was basically his third book, and it was his accelerated learning model. It's how he learned the Brazilian tango and won some competition in tango and all the other things he did. And what was interesting was he said part of his process is he'll go find somebody who's really good at the thing he wants to be good at. He'll interview them and he listens for what they say explicitly. And then he also listens for what they don't say, but is implied, what's implicit. And I think this was really important because if we overlay this with sort of the conversation we're having with Alex Hormozy or any other influencer who's telling you how to throw seeds and grow gardens, like, here's how you make money. What they're saying to you explicitly what worked for them. And it's a very broad stroke. Gary Vee says, here's what you need: 100 pieces of content. And then everybody hears that and thinks, oh my God, I'm going to have all kinds of fruit and harvest if I just do 100 pieces of content. And it's not the point. Of course, you couldn't summarize the entire success of Gary's garden because he said you have to do 100 pieces of content a day. That's not the whole thing. So you have to also listen implicitly for what is implied, what's in the background, what is also contributing to the success that isn't being said. And if you can get that, then you would know that there is stuff unspoken about how what makes it work. And you're going to have to find your own implicit thing. Like when you said, Aaron, you're like, I failed. Oh, this worked. And then there's this implied thing, this implicit thing that comes alongside of you and accompanies you in your own distinguishing of the garden you want to build. And you couldn't have found that if you hadn't failed. But when we feel like imposters, it's because we're constantly looking for someone else's explicit broad stroke of how I'm supposed to, make this garden bear fruit. And then I get frustrated that it didn't work. And It's because you're trying to take, advice from the cheap seats or from the grandstand instead of actually being in the distinguishing and the failing of what works for you.
Right.
So anyway,
I think that's great, Chris. That's yeah. I mean, that I would need to read it to really get what he's talking about the implicit thing. But for sure, I mean, I get inundated with, ads on my feed and emails all the time about, adding $400,000 in GCI and that whole thing. And it really is all 100%. And even when you watch the people on stage at a conference, like the winners, the funnel hacking conference winners or whatever, the people in your real estate stages, all the stages, those are always the outliers. They are by definition the outliers. They are they are specifically chosen because they are outliers.
Yeah.
Right. Except what they're presenting is this is what works, except that what they're really saying is this is what worked for me in my market at this time, the way I did it, the tone of my voice, all the different things that happened, the shoes I was wearing, all the different things that they're not actually saying. Right. They've boiled it down to these 3 success steps, but you can't reproduce it just with those 3 success steps. If you could, there would be no one on stage. Right. So they're always, and that's never acknowledged in any way. Right. And it's important for you to get, those 3 steps work for them. What are the 3 steps that now some principles are worth distinguishing, like, how many hours a day did they work? Right. And how many doors did they knock in my business? Or how much did they, what was in the testing? How many different models did they test it? And what did those tests look like? All the details about how they did it, but those recipes that they're selling. Right. People talk to me all the time about baking bread. Right. And I'm always like, well, it's very personalized to your kitchen. Your oven, how hot is your oven really? And, these are recipes are broad brushstrokes of in directional. Right? Try this first and then tune it to your specific circumstances. And I don't think here the tuning as because your garden isn't a different, we're just going to keep throwing metaphors in here, just different metaphors all the time. But your garden has a different orientation to the sun than my garden did. So it's direct sun for you isn't direct sun for me.
It's great.
Right. And your
what
soil
zone are you in? Zone 7, zone 5,
right.
zone. I mean,
exactly. So you can get it to work. You just gotta realize that there's a whole world of implicit things unsaid that need to be distinguished.
It's interesting to me if I just summarize this whole thing. It occurs to me like what we're talking about is agency. Like, when you could own your garden. Like, listen to all the people from stage say their general broad brushstrokes of how they got what their recipe is. But at some level, it's going to be you failing until you own and go all in on the kind of garden that you want to create, knowing that the garden will bear fruit in dollars. It will bear dollars. There will be a harvest. But to me, I feel like for me, the secret sauce in finding peace with my mindful approach to business, my mindful journey of business has been in the owning and the distinguishing of the kind of garden I want to build. And now that I know, I'm not unclear about it, I'm clear, this is what I want to build. Now it's tending weeds, it's watering it, nurturing it. I'm not confused about the garden I'm building. I'm not questioning what kind of things I planted. I'm like, this is what I'm planting. And I can be patient for the gestation that it takes for it to yield.
Yeah. Great. And you garden for the love of gardening.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not that you wouldn't garden if it didn't, it's not that you would garden if it didn't produce fruit. You're gardening so that it produces fruit.
Yeah.
And you've got to have an orientation to it that you are loving the gardening itself. the failing. So,
Yeah.
all right, good. Well, let's
Woo.
wrap that there. That was an interesting little journey.
Yeah. I think it's so relevant and important because I think a lot of people who get stuck between their soul is calling them to a mindful approach, but they're in a CEO mindset of I gotta hit a number. I gotta yield. I need a harvest. There's just finding a way to make peace with those two worlds is important.
That's what we're dealing with.
That's what we're
That's
doing.
good. That's what I'm dealing with. All
Good
right,
stuff,
dude.
friend.
All right, brother.
Those of you listening, hey, this is the kind of conversation like you can see even in the evolution of the conversation where we started today and where we ended, like that there is a working out of the madness we bump into on a daily basis. Aaron and I have been in this world for a while, and we still bump into these things. I'm assuming you do the same thing. So that's why we created the mastermind, right? The Mindful CEO Mastermind, so that you could be in a conversation with other people who are walking this kind of stuff home
and grappling with it and seeing what happens next. So
that's right. We learn from each
till
other.
next week.
So, well, go to themindfulceo.com if you want to
sorry.
learn more about that, and then we'll see you next week.
All right.
Thanks, Aaron.
Bye.